Okay, so let's talk about my first TPK, or total party kill. The full party wipe. It's every DM's secret fantasy. I mean, worst nightmare. And trust me, it wasn't planned. But it wasn't not planned either, you know what I'm saying? This story has everything: dungeon crawling despair, a twist villain, and an ending so soul crushing it can make Vecna blush. So grab your dice, ready your popcorn, and let me take you on a journey through a one shot that left my players equal parts horrified and impressed. You know, after they stopped yelling at me. It started like any classic one shot that I had to scrape together last minute because not all of our usual campaign players were able to show up with an unfortunate amount of late notice. My party, 3 adventurers: a ranger, a monk, and a barbarian. They woke up on cold stone floors, the smell of mildew in the air, and a headache pounding in their skulls. They had no gear, no memories, and only one certainty: they were locked up tight in some warlord's dungeon. Across the hall, a young girl's voice broke the silence. She was locked in the opposite cell, her face pale and tear-streaked, but her hands held the answer: a ring of keys. She swiped from the guard, she explained, but she was too scared to use them herself. The party coaxed her into helping, and once the cell doors creaked open, the little girl whispered a dire warning. "The warlord who rules this keep," she said, "isn't just some brutal tyrant. He's made a deal with a demon. He's more monster than man." Comforting, right? And with that, the party was free, but still gearless and surrounded by guards. Great start. The first obstacle was immediate. 2 guards in dented armor, seated at a table just down the corridor. They weren't exactly the vigilant type. One was midway through shuffling a deck of cards, while the other snacked on a loaf of stale bread. Classic evil minion energy. The monk, ever the stealthy type, tried to keep closer, but fate, or a botched stealth roll, had other plans. A bucket clattered to the ground, and the guards shot to their feet. One scrambled to grab his sword, the other refused to let go of his cards, as if clutching them would somehow ward off death. The barbarian wasn't having it. With a roar, they charged into the fray, swinging a chair they'd ripped out of the guard's makeshift gambling setup. The ranger grabbed a dagger off the table, and the monk went full martial artist. Within moments, the guards were down, and the party had their first victory. And some rusty weapons to show for it. A solid upgrade from bare hands. From there, the keep became a labyrinth of narrow corridors, dimly lit chambers, and the occasional ominous drip of water echoing off the stone walls. The little girl clung to the party, her tiny voice a constant presence as she led them forward. With each step, she painted a grim picture of the outside world. Crops failing, villages abandoned, and the land itself twisting into something unrecognizable. She explained how the Warlord's Pact wasn't just about power, it was about a plan. "He wants to bring the demon into our world," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to tug at their heroic instincts. "And once he does, there won't be anything left for anyone. The skies will turn black, and the ground will rot. The keep is just the beginning." Despite the bleakness, the party spirits lifted slightly when they stumbled upon something a little peculiar. A tapestry hung unevenly against a wall, its bottom corner curled up as if hiding a secret. The monk's curiosity got the better of him, and with a quick tug, the fabric revealed a hidden door. Inside, the room was untouched by the decay that consumed the rest of the keep. A single chest sat at the center, its lock dusty but sturdy. With deft hands, the monk worked the lock, and with a satisfying click, the lid creaked open. Within lay a bow, its craftsmanship almost otherworldly. Runes carved along its length seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, and an inscription read, "For those who would break walls and shatter gates." The ranger eagerly claimed it, testing its weight and balance. The little girl nodded approvingly. "That bow is meant for destroying something great," she explained, her voice now tinged with hope. "It might just give us a chance to stop him." After battling their way through waves of guards, some more competent than others, they finally reached the throne room. And it was horrifying. The air was heavy with the smell of blood and decay. Prisoners hung in cages from the ceiling, their bodies barely alive as their life essence drained into the carved channels in the stone floor. At the far end of the room stood a coffin, glowing faintly as a trickle of ash-like sand poured into it. Each drop seemed to make it brighter, more sinister. And sitting in front of this macabre scene was a hulking orc, a rune-covered greatsword resting across his knees. The party hesitated, but the barbarian, ever bold, led the charge. As they closed the distance, something strange happened. The orc began to flicker, like an image projected onto the smoke. Before the party could react, a high-pitched laugh echoed behind them. They spun around to see the little girl, their innocent guide, transforming. Her form twisted and grew until she was unrecognizable. Her voice deepened, and standing before them was the warlord himself, a towering figure radiating dark energy. The trap had been sprung. The tension in the throne room was palpable. The warlord, now revealed to be the little girl who had led them here, was a nightmare come to life. Each time they tried to strike him, each time they pushed forward with everything they had, the warlord would drain the life force from one of the poor souls hanging in the cages, his strength growing as theirs waned. The ranger, gripping the enchanted bow, aimed desperately at the coffin at the back of the room. There was hope, faint as it was. The inscription on the bow, for those who would break walls and shatter gates. It had to mean something. A weapon meant for destruction. Surely it could shatter this barrier. But as the arrow flew, it bounced harmlessly off the protective magic surrounding the coffin. It wasn't just protected, it was impenetrable. A laugh echoed from behind them. "Did you really think this bow would save you? It's just another part of my game," the warlord taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. The ranger fired again, but nothing changed it. Desperation set in. They could hear the battle behind them, the roar of the barbarian charging in vain, but all the ranger could do was shoot arrows at a coffin that wouldn't break. Panic was starting to take hold. The monk, always quick to act, dashed to the hanging prisoners, their hands moving with practiced precision as they tried to pick the locks. But no matter how fast they worked, no matter how many keys they tried, the locks wouldn't budge. The prisoners, barely conscious, could do nothing to help. They weren't strong enough to fight back against their bindings, and the monk's movements grew frantic as they continued to fumble with the locks. Click! Another failure. The monk's breath grew ragged. They had to free them. They had to stop this. They had. But time was running out. Meanwhile, the barbarian, in a rage-fueled frenzy, charged the warlord. No strategy, no thought, just an instinctual urge to strike, to bring this madness to an end. But it was a doomed charge. The warlord countered every blow with the practiced ease of a seasoned warrior, each strike that landed causing the barbarian to stagger back. The warlord wasn't just strong, he was draining the life of the prisoners, growing stronger with every death. The barbarian's blows, powerful though they were, seemed insignificant in comparison. The monk's mind raced as they tried one last time to pick the lock, their fingers slipping as sweat dripped down on their face. They were so close, but with each failure, they felt the weight of defeat closing in. And still, the warlord drained more prisoners, his power growing with every passing second. Then, in the midst of the chaos, my players finally saw the truth of the situation. There was no escape. The warlord was too powerful, the coffin too well guarded. The ranger's arrows couldn't penetrate the magic. The monk's efforts to free the prisoners were futile, and the barbarian, strong as he was outmatched and overwhelmed. With a sickening realization, the monk dropped the keys and ran towards the barbarian, but it was too late. The warlord's greatsword came down with a final blow, knocking the barbarian to the ground, and with that, hope was lost. The party's final moments were a blur of screams, desperation, and the realization that the odds had never been in their favor. The ranger, shaking with panic, continued firing arrows at the coffin, but each shot was a wasted effort. The monk, realizing there was no time left, stood helpless as their comrades fell one by one. Barbarian, then monk, then ranger. It didn't end there, though. My players, convinced of the TPK they had just felt, listened as I described what happened next. Their spirits rose, weightless and free from the broken, lifeless bodies they had once called their own. They floated in a haze, disoriented, unsure of what had happened or where they were. The world around them was dark, still, and quiet, until the horror hit them with bone-crushing clarity. Below them, their corpses were being dragged across the cold, stone floor by the warlord himself. With merciless efficiency, he threw their lifeless forms into the furnace. The fire consumed them instantly, devouring what remained of their flesh and bones with a brutal, unrelenting hunger. As their bodies turned to ash, their spirits could only watch in silent dread, helpless in their ethereal state. The same ash that had once been them, their very essence, was now feeding the glowing coffin across the room. The truth slammed into them like a ton of bricks. Their deaths had been part of the warlord's plan all along. The coffin, now brighter and more powerful, pulsed with dark energy. The ritual that had been set in motion with their sacrifice was nearly complete. The warlord's scheme had worked. They had been mere pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. And just as realization took root, a force beyond their control yanked them away, pulling them deeper, dragging them toward a place darker and colder than anything they could have imagined. They fell through a vast, endless void, until finally they were thrust into an even darker space. The air grew thick, suffocating them as a presence loomed over them. vast and oppressive, filling every inch of the void with its sheer force. They could feel it before they saw it, the weight of an unimaginable power, an ancient evil that had been watching them all along. There, sitting atop a throne of jagged bones and crumbling skulls, was the demon. The one they had unknowingly served, the one who had orchestrated their deaths from the very beginning. The creature was a grotesque mask of shadow and flame, its body coiled with unnatural energy, as though the abyss itself had forged it. The demon's eyes glowed with an infernal fire, twin orbs that seemed to burn right through their souls. It grinned, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. And then, in a voice like the grinding of mountains, ancient and terrible, it spoke. "You fools," it growled, its voice reverberating through their very beings. "Did you think you were special? That your lives mattered?" It leaned forward, its shadow stretching like a vast wave about to crush them. "You've been here before, over and over, and every time, you fail. Every death, every sacrifice brings me closer to your world." The air thickened, and the temperature dropped, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart by its presence. The demon's laugh echoed, low and mocking, an unholy sound that rattled their bones. "Just a few more cycles," he mused, "and I will rise, and when I do, your world will burn. Every living thing will burn, just like you did. Like you always will." With a mere flick of its clawed hand, the demon dismissed them as though they were nothing. It wasn't even a thought to it. The abyss shifted again, and they were pulled away, helpless, lost to the eternal darkness. And then, as if everything before had been a cruel dream, the scene shifted. The pain, the weightlessness, gone. They suddenly woke up. Their bodies ached, their heads pounded as they sat up, disoriented, on the cold stone floor of an unfamiliar dungeon. The faces around them were strange, unrecognizable, and most haunting of all, they had no memory of who they were. They had no gear, no memories, and only one certainty. They were locked up tight in some warlord's dungeon. And across the hall, a young girl's voice broke the silence. So yeah, that was my first TPK, and believe it or not, it was actually part of my prep for the start. The whole thing was always in the back of my mind, even though I didn't think I'd need it. But, D&D is a fickle mistress, and I could see the potential for disaster from a mile away. It wasn't that I wanted them to die. Who am I, some sort of sadistic monster? But I knew if the stars aligned just wrong, the warlord's trap could pull them under. And, well, the dice did their thing. At the end of the day, I was pretty damn sure that if they just banded together and gone for the warlord, they'd have won. They were that close. They had the skills, the teamwork, everything they needed. But, and here's the kicker, this is what makes D&D so wild. The tiniest mistake, the tiniest distraction, and boom, you're in the furnace. Literally. But here's where it gets juicy. This wasn't just some throwaway one-shot. Nope. This death, this tragedy, was baked right into the larger narrative of my campaign. The demon they thought they'd vanquished? Oh no, that was just the beginning. What they didn't know was that this demon's claws were already in their story, in their very souls. And that TPK? It was the moment that unlocked the true threat. The demon would eventually be the big bad of the entire campaign. They thought they were free, but they were already tangled in its web, and I couldn't wait to see how they'd react when it all came crashing down. That's the thing about D&D. You think you're in control, that you can plan everything perfectly, but the dice have a mind of their own. Sometimes, things don't go the way you want, but you know what? You can always make what your players do work for your story. After all, it's a group narrative. What they do might just take things in a direction you never expected. And hell, that might make the game even more interesting for you too. Sometimes you just have to roll with it, literally. And when the world turns upside down, you hang on and hope it's at least a little fun, even if it's a complete and utter disaster. So until next time, we'll catch you on the flip side. And remember, the real lesson is never, ever split the party.